right, we are back. This is a really special episode because I'm talking to, again, somebody that I don't know, which is always really awesome. James Pillay has joined me, and he is part of the Interfaith Fellowship at UW-Madison. So talking to a fellow dude from Madison, first time that's happened, so that's cool. But there's 8 of you who are going through this program, and I had a chance to meet your professor. Professor Ulrich, is that his first name or last name?
First name.
Got it. So I met him for coffee. He was super pumped about the program and just said, "Hey, let's see who else in the program wants to be a part of this." So you're the first person to go through this from your interfaith fellowship program. So I'm super happy to have you on, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for inviting us. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to each talk about our own faith and our journeys to get where we are today. It's great to be with you, Miles.
Awesome. Love it. So are you from Madison originally?
No, originally I'm from the suburbs of Detroit, but Madison was the best business program that I got into. So here I am. I'm just over halfway done now.
Awesome. Love it. There's a show called The Detroiters that I'm just now getting into with Tim Robinson. I don't know if you've heard of that at all, but like they always have like Detroit featured stuff throughout the entire episode. It's super, super weird comedy. It might not be for you. Maybe it's just me. But Tim Robinson also has that show, I Think You Should Leave, which is super popular right now on Netflix. But I don't know. Detroiters, whenever it says there's somebody from Detroit, I always bring up that. Have you heard of that?
I haven't heard of the show, but no, there's a lot of cool stuff in the city.
Yeah, for sure. Well, cool, man. Well, again, thank you for coming on. Super pumped to have this conversation. So let's start at the obvious question. What is your faith and what's your spirituality at this point in your life?
Of course, right. So right now I'm Catholic, right? And then ideally I would be Catholic for the rest of my life, right? Yeah, so I've been practicing Catholic for 2 years now. I was confirmed a year ago. So would you like
awesome.
me to go through the whole story, or how would you?
That sounds like it's a very unique place to be in your life, to be confirmed, because you said you're a junior in college right now. So you confirmed freshman year, I would assume, of college. So that's a unique journey. So how do we get to that point?
All right. So I guess kind of starting from the beginning, right? So neither of my parents are religious, so I come from a non-religious household. But my mom's side of the family is Catholic, and then my dad's side of the family was Hindu, right? But neither one of them are really practicing, and then really have kind of strong beliefs in those areas. So kind of raised in an agnostic household, you could say. But religion wasn't a big part of life growing up, right? Like parents never took us to worship services on any side. It just was a topic that rarely came up, right? But my mom's uncle, actually, whenever he would come into town to visit, he'd always kind of give me nuggets about the faith, like just a sentence or two about Jesus. And then I'd be lying if I said that it didn't touch my heart. I really kind of wanted to explore this, but wasn't really able to with the lifestyle that kind of our family was living, right, in a kind of very non-religious area. I didn't many or really any kind of religious friends for most of my upbringing. So it just wasn't something that was really on my radar. And then I don't even know how I could have, right, kind of practiced it on my own as a kid, right, nonetheless. Sure. But something that I was really looking forward to exploring when I got the chance. One of the things that's also interesting is that I always had a drive in me to not only pursue this, but also to defend it, the faith, right? So even when I was in grade school, I remember these kids making fun of Jesus, and I remember just like going off there about all that.
Dude, it's the amount of times we've had technical difficulties. It doesn't matter what platform we use. It could be Zoom, it could be Zencaster. Like something always happens, like once a week. So it's all good. All right. So we were talking about how you had this drive to pursue and defend the faith. So talk about that.
These seeds are kind of planted in me from the beginning, right? Where whenever I would hear somebody who's more secular and then maybe somewhat hostile to Christianity, kind of give some sort of objection or kind of a question in bad faith, right? I would just have this kind of drive to offer some sort of defense, right? And then I didn't know anything. I didn't even know really the basics of Christianity, let alone Christian apologetics, right? The art of defending and articulating the faith, right? So it wasn't really much, but it was something, right? So I always had a drive to at least give something. And then that's kind of nicely led me to where I am now, right? I was waiting to explore the faith, but I couldn't growing up. So I said, okay, when I come to university, that's going to be my chance, right? I'll be independent. I'll be in a new area, right? I'll have the resources to go and give this a shot, right? I looked up Catholic churches in Madison the night before I leave Detroit. And then I see the Catholic Student Center here at St. Paul's, which is a phenomenal place, right? I go for a tour a few days later, and then I go to Mass, which is our worship service on that first Sunday, from 0 to 18 and a half. The amount of times I'd been in a church, I could count on a single hand, right? Whenever my uncle would come into town, right? And now I go pretty much every single day, and I'm the happiest I've ever been. So
That's awesome.
the story in a nutshell.
It's fascinating that you had this like want desire, like not really being a Catholic, not being, like you said, your family isn't going to church or going to temple or anything like that. What about it? Like what types of things would kind of pique your interest of needing to respond, even not being like a quote unquote Catholic when you were younger?
Yeah, it's honestly, it's extremely mysterious. And then I've been doing a lot of reflecting on that over the last 2 years, and I don't have an answer. I think it was just some sort of innate drive, right? For my friends who may not believe, I don't want to just say it was the Holy Spirit, but I think now I kind of recognize that was God's Holy Spirit dwelling within me that really pushed me to do that, even when I knew nothing and then wasn't even practicing, and then you could say not even believing too, in a sense, right? Because I didn't even know what to believe, right? Mm-hmm. But that drive was absolutely there, and then the fruits of it were there too. Me trying to offer up a defense. So I think it was God's Spirit.
So what would those conversations look like? Like what would someone say, and then what would be your response? Like how would that even work? Not being, like you said, a believer at the time, like was it something that they were like, well, God's not real, and then you'd have to say he is, and here's why? Or like, what do those conversations look like?
Well, to be honest, they weren't really common. They were very few and far between. So we're talking like less than like 5 ever. So maybe like 3 or 4 times. I don't really remember exactly what I said, but I remember just trying to push back in some minimal way, just with passion, but without the knowledge or talent. But they were very short, less than 2 minutes probably each time, and then very few and far between. So that wasn't really kind of defining me, those like few and far between arguments for my first 18 and a half years. It was just basically the lack of religion was kind of my story for.
Sure, that makes sense. So yep. What do you feel like is the drive to join the Catholic Church versus, because you said your dad was Hindu, but not practicing, correct? Right. What's the drive?
I don't think that he's Hindu. I think he's agnostic.
Got it. Okay.
But his side of the family is Hindu. Yeah.
Got it. So perhaps it's just the, like, do you feel like, this is kind of a hypothetical, but I am interested. If you had an uncle on your dad's side that had been talking about Hindu principles, do you feel like you would have been as eager, or not necessarily to jump in and believe, but to learn about it? Like, what about, I'll just leave it at that. Like, do you feel like that could have been a possibility at all?
In one level, it's hard to say, right? Because it is tough. But I think from what we know, probably not, because you don't really see Westerners become Hindu, right? Especially on a large scale, right? It's something that's very much extremely tied into cultural traditions of that one region of the world, right? And then even Hinduism itself is going to vary depending on where you are in India, right? It's not going to be as unified of a set of beliefs, right? I don't think it has the sort of mass global and cultural appeal that Christianity has had, right? If you look at Christianity, whether it's the halls of Buckingham Palace to Congress to the plains of Africa or to the jungles of South America, right? You're seeing predominantly Christian civilizations. And part of that is because the people who were colonizing the world brought along missionaries, right, on their journeys. But the fact that they were so receptive to it in a lot of cases, right? Not all cases, but the fact that it has the sort of appeal to people all over the world just goes to show that there's a good chance that this is really God's message for humanity, right? If you look at what Jesus says in Matthew 28, right? Go forth and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you, right? So this really is a message for the whole world. And I think that much of the world is hearing that and is believing that. So in that sense, God is succeeding in winning sinners to himself.
I always find that interesting of, like you said, there's Christians all over the world. There's want and desire to have other people believe your faith, but other religions don't have that. Like I always find it's a really interesting juxtaposition between like Judaism and Christianity, where you don't really have Jewish missionaries like going out. It's more of like a cultural thing, similar to how you said like Hinduism. I always find that interesting. Like Like I don't know why that is, other than like the Bible verse that you quoted of like that it says in the Bible like we should be doing this as Christians. It just seems so fascinating to me, not being a religious person, that we wouldn't have other religions wanting to do the same thing. Like, wouldn't you want everybody to believe what you want? Wouldn't you want all of these people to be missionaries? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
No, it is a fascinating question, right? I don't want to speak for Jews because I don't
Sure.
know enough, right,
Yeah, no,
about
that
that.
makes
But
sense. That's going to
yeah,
be in
no,
your
exactly.
curriculum, right? Like coming up as like learning about other religions and other what other people have to think, right?
Yeah, exactly, right, in our fellowship. But from what I've heard from a lot of Jewish people is that they actually discourage conversion rather than encourage it. And I don't want to speculate, but a part of what Judaism is that you've got a certain people, and then I would agree with this too, right? That we're selected by God to bless all nations and then reconcile the world to himself. These are God's chosen people, but not for their own sake, for the sake of the whole world, right? He would ultimately send his son to come up through the Jewish people, right? If you're the chosen people, then other people who are in other parts of the world weren't, right? So that kind of makes sense. So I don't want to speak for them, but that's from what I understand.
Yeah, that makes sense. I actually never thought about that. Like you always hear like the Jews are the chosen people. Okay, well, if you're chosen, then you're chosen. Like that's it. If you weren't chosen, you weren't chosen. I've never really thought about that phrase.
Yeah, what does it
Why?
actually mean, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I do
I
think that Judaism is a revealed religion. I do
hmm,
think that Judaism is from God. But what I would say as a Christian is that current Jewish people today are in error for not recognizing Jesus as the Messiah and as God come in the flesh to his people and to the whole world.
sure.
But I do
Yeah, and
think that it is from God.
Definitely heard that before too. So that tracks. Why Catholicism? Like there's hundreds of different types of Christianity sects out there. Like so why Catholicism specifically for you?
I think there's kind of two questions there, right? Why Catholicism initially, and then why continue in Catholicism, right?
Sure.
Initially, honestly, it's because my uncle was Catholic, right? I didn't really have a direct sort of Protestant influence there, which is interesting too, because my background is in politics. I've sort of moved away from politics over the last few years just because I found something that's more beautiful. And then that's sort of all I want to say about that. It's still very important, but religious matters and questions of God and then God's revelation to humanity are logically extremely more important than that. There's good work to be done in politics, right? But there are a lot of people interested in that. Like political views on videos on YouTube will get millions of views, but videos about religion will sometimes get only thousands, right? They'll seldom get millions. So there's not a lot of people kind of in the conversation about this and broader society. That's where I have been wanting to focus my efforts. But why I brought that up was because obviously, and especially Protestant and evangelical influences really kind of shaped the political sphere in a lot of ways, right? There was an influence there kind of indirectly, but it was always going to be a Catholic for me from the non-practicing side. That's just what appealed to me more just because that was what I knew, right? I guess also what was off-putting about certain sects of Protestantism would be fundamentalism, right? So people kind of taking the entire Bible literally, which is I've always found it to be funny because the Bible doesn't actually say anywhere to take the whole thing literally. That's a presupposition that these people had, but that goes unjustified, right? Because why not interpret these books and these letters according to the genre of which they were written? So then you can really see what an author's saying, right? So when you see poetry in the Psalms, nobody's taking that literally because it's poetry, right? When you look at the book of Revelation, you talk about a dragon in the sky moving its tail and then a third of the stars falling down. The vast majority of the tradition has understood that belongs to the genre of Jewish apocalyptic literature. Right? The vast majority of people have not taken that literally. So it does seem to me to be a better approach to approximate what genre it is and then interpret it so we can see what these authors were thinking versus just a sort of blanket literalistic approach. Obviously, Protestants are not committed to that. And then I don't even think most Protestants are fundamentalists. I would say definitely not. But the ones that are oftentimes the loudest voices. That was probably off-putting a little bit too, right?
Can you talk about the process of going through and getting baptized as a young adult going into college? Like, what did that look like for you?
I was actually baptized as an infant.
Oh, you were?
Right?
Okay.
Because my mom's family wanted me to get baptized. I did get baptized, but no church and then no Sunday school, no confirmation classes, nothing like that. Right. So once I was here, like my journey, I was kind of dragged hands and feet into the realm of apologetics, right, defending the faith. And I started going to church for the first time in my life. I started to engage with the Bible. I started to be surrounded with holy people, right? People trying to live lives of love and people trying to not live their life just for themselves, right? Not to say that that's going to be all secular people, but
Sure.
when you meet people who are really in love with Christ, there is something that strikes them about you. They are radiating with this joy. And I was beginning to catch some of that, right? From praying and from going to mass. And I really wanted to share it with friends of mine in my dorm room, right? In my dorm floor, excuse me. And I had surrounded myself with very smart people. And these people wanted answers. They had objections, they had questions. They really pushed back and they were giving me a run for my money, right? And I didn't know how to answer a lot of these questions and objections, right? Because popular objections are popular for a reason, because they resonate with a lot of people, right? They usually will have some merit to them, right? And then I just had no idea. If you could just answer this off the top of your head, then nobody would be bringing them up, right? I started researching, and you kind of start with low-level guys who are going to be getting millions of views. Then you work your way up the intellectual ladder, I like to say, or the ladder of rigor, right? When you get to the professional philosophers with demonstrations and then probabilistic arguments for God, right? I didn't want to get into it, but I did because of the people around me. And it wasn't all altruistic, right? As I would like to say, part of it was for myself with my own doubts. I wanted to be reassured. I wanted to know that this was more probably true than false, because you can have the most beautiful message ever, right? But at the end of the day, if it's not true, then it's not true, right? You don't want to be deluding yourself. Paul says the same thing in his letter to the Corinthians, right? In the 15th chapter, he says, if Christ has not been raised, then your faith is in vain. These early Christians really believed that Jesus did experience a bodily resurrection, and then they're admitting if our religion is nonsense if this event didn't happen. So there is always a relationship to truth, and there has been from the beginning. So I started studying it for myself, and then for the friends around me, and then now I find it as enjoying as it is important. So it's the great joy of my life to get to know the Lord intellectually from the heart as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. So in the dorm rooms, like what were some of the questions that you were getting that inspired you to dig in a little bit further and just try to sift through whatever these questions were?
No, it's great. This is kind of the story of my whole freshman year, was arguing and then evangelizing and then debating on my dorm floor. And then luckily there was probably 150 people on the floor, so the stock was right. The harvest was there. Some of these debates lasted until 5 a.m. Right. I remember several nights going to sleep when the sun had started to rise. Right. That's an interesting feeling. Right.
Yeah.
People are just waking up and then you haven't even gone to sleep yet. So about everything, right? Questions about everything. So the compatibility between faith and science, right? I've seen studies that show that the top 3 reasons why young Christians, Catholics in particular, leave the church and leave the faith when they leave the household, when they get to university. Perceived incompatibility between faith and science, a dislike of the church's teaching on sex. So very honest there. I like that. And then the third would be purported Old Testament violence and then atrocities, right? Like how could a good God command genocide, institute all these weird laws and things of that nature. So those took up a lot of the questions freshman year. Also questions about non-Christians being saved. Like what does that look like if you're not a Christian, if you've never heard or if you've rejected, how does your eternal future look like? So questions from all over, right? About challenges to God, challenges to knowing about the past so we can even debate what happened to Jesus. Questions all over. And then more emotional questions too. So not just intellectual. Questions about same-sex relationships, stealing in the cafeteria, right? And it's a whole bunch of that. So lots of intellectual and emotional objections that I faced. And then I just was in this process of being sharpened like all throughout the year. And it's really funny too, because by the end of the year, I would have been able to answer most questions because they're not experts. I wouldn't, especially at that time, but also now too, wouldn't be able to go against the top atheist philosophers, but other laymen, I would be able to answer most questions, right? I wish that I had some sort of time machine that I could go back and then strengthen the answers that I was giving them, because it seems that I missed my window in a lot of cases, right? But that was kind of my freshman year. So it was a really, really, really fun.
That's heavy stuff, man. So you hear all these questions. It makes you want to dig in about it. Like, were you digging into these questions from the sense of like, I already know that this is not like what this person is asking me, I probably disagree with. Like, I'm going to go find the answer. Like, were you solidifying what you thought you already knew? Or were you trying to dig in and challenge yourself? Or was it a little bit of both? Does that make sense?
I think that it was a little bit of both, but it was more towards the end of solidifying, right? I like to say, if you were to give me, if there were 2 buttons that you put in front of me, and then one of them, if I pressed it, it would either that Christianity was false or just fail. It wouldn't tell me anything. And then the other button if I pressed it, it would tell me that Christianity was true, or it would fail, right? So it wouldn't really alert me to anything. And then said, okay, you can push either one, or you could push both of them, or neither. What would you pick, right? And I would push the button that says that I would want to find out if Christianity was false, or fail me, right? Because I don't want to be deluding myself here, right? If it's false, I want to know, right? So then I can kind of get the most out of my finite years of existence rather than sacrifice these finite years in hopes for something greater. So that would be kind of a cool question to know. So I would press that button, but I wouldn't touch the other one, right? And the reason why is because I wouldn't want my free will to be overwhelmed. And I think that this is actually the reason why God remains largely hidden from us, right? So one of the challenges to God's existence is called the problem of hiddenness, right? So the objector would say something along the lines of, it's very mysterious that God would, if he wants us to believe in him and then come to a relationship with him, would have his existence be ambiguous and to not have it be obvious, and to have that stumbling block in the minds of a lot of people of not even getting over the hump of belief, let alone placing their faith in him, right? So it doesn't just seem more simple that he doesn't exist rather than he's playing some sort of elaborate game with us, right? I kind of want to steel man that argument, right? But I'm not so sure about that, actually, because God isn't interested in just having us believe in him, right? Because he could have made his existence obvious, right? He could have inscribed on the surface of every atom made by God, right? Or he could have wrote in the sky with the clouds, I exist, believe in me. But he doesn't do that. And my answer would be that it's possible, it's genuinely possible that God may have sufficient reasons for remaining hidden. And then one of those reasons maybe is that he wants to preserve our free will, right? Because if we have this notion that punishment is guaranteed if we don't accept him and then come to him, then there's a strong sense that we're going to avoid sin and then do acts of love, not for the sake of God, but for the sake of punishment, right? If there's a possibility that we could engage in all the pleasures and then do all of the evils or sins that are in front of us and that we're faced with, and still get off scot-free at the end, yet we still choose God, or even think about it from the other side, that God may not even exist, but we still place our faith in him. I still pray for an hour a day. I still read the scriptures. I still try to evangelize and make sacrifices, even though it may all be for nothing. I think you have a faith that's extremely beautiful in that way, because you're choosing God for the sake of God, not even though there's no guarantee of reward, and you're still avoiding sin, even though there's no guarantee of punishment. So possibility, it's all for nothing, and you still choose the good. I think that's extremely rich, right? It sort of allows us for maximum freedom. I think that our free will, to an extent, would be compromised if we knew absolutely that it's hell or God as our options. I think for me personally, I would be choosing a lot of this stuff because who wants to suffer? But if you look at a lot of secular people, right, they don't believe in hell, because why would they? They're secular, right? They can do a lot of these things thinking that they'll get off scot-free, and then that's intuitive. I would think the same thing if I was secular myself. So sure. The idea that there is that option and alternative that may really describe reality, that is a live option on the table, that off scot-free or in God not existing, but yet you still choose holiness, is extremely, extremely rich in my view, and then that satisfies me completely on that issue. So that's why actually I pray that I never see a miracle, right? Because you see kind of reports of healings in a lot of areas in the Christian world, and especially in the Catholic world. And I've prayed multiple times that I never see that, because I want, whenever I do something, and especially whenever I do something supererogatory, going to Mass every Sunday would be obligatory. But then going to Mass every day would be very much supererogatory, right? So be commended rather than commanded. But right now I'm sort of doing that completely out of my free will, out of love. But then if I'll have this guarantee that God exists, and it seems to me that I'll just immediately kind of be drawn to it and then feel like I have to, like I'm forced. There is a sense where I have maximum free will with there being some ambiguity. So that kind of settles it for me. It may not for everybody, but I'm totally satisfied with that answer.
Cool. Love it. One thing I find fascinating is, I've had people on here that used to be Catholic or grew up Catholic. I grew up in the Lutheran faith, LCMS, which is like Catholic light for all intents and purposes, pretty much Catholic, but we don't have like confessional. And there was always this, and I've talked about this before on this podcast, about like this sense of fear that I would have as a kid. And like, I've talked with other Catholics who are now out of the Catholic faith that like also talked about this sense of fear of like that the heaven and hell thing, or just being like generally afraid of like what happens if I don't really believe this. But I've also talked with like yourself. I've talked with people that are still involved with the Catholic faith that talk about the beauty of the faith, that talk about the lovingness of God. Why do you think there's a disconnect with people that fall out of it versus people that are still in of it, with like this sense of beauty, but also this sense of like dread and like, oh crap, like what's going to happen to me if I don't actually believe this?
No, that's a phenomenal question. That's a really, really, really interesting inquiry. And what I would say is that kind of both aspects are important, right? Because God is pure love, right? And he's pure mercy and he's goodness, but he's also justice, right? And God is a perfect being, right? That's one of the philosophical definitions of God, right? A perfect being. And then what does that mean? I like the definition of perfect being, which is that a being that possesses every great making property. So it's greater to exist rather than to not exist. He's got existence, right? It's greater to be intelligent than to be unintelligent. So he's got intelligence and to the maximum degree, right? It's also greater to be just than it is to be unjust, right? Nobody, when we see the video of George Floyd's neck being pushed into the ground, thinks that, oh, that guy who did that deserves to just walk away with no repercussions, right? Because that's not just. He did something evil. We have this sort of intuition of retributive justice. And retributive justice says that deserves to be rewarded and then evil deserves to be punished. So there is absolutely a just aspect to there, but that's not the focus of the faith, right? That's an aspect. Even the Bible talks about this, right? That fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So when you're in the early stages of the spiritual life, then a lot of the sins and a lot of kind of actions that we would say are evil, right, as revealed by God and as are discoverable in the nature of man, right? A lot of the times you'll be avoiding this stuff because you don't want to go to hell, right? We've all been in places like that, especially at the beginning of your spiritual life. But then as you grow and then you mature, love replaces fear and then even duty in the things that you do. Your motivation for loving and for avoiding sin is not the avoidance of punishment, but it's done out of the desire to be in the presence of the one that you love and the one that loves you more, right? I always like to say that I'm getting this from somebody else, but Christianity, properly speaking, is not about saying no. It's about saying yes. It's about saying yes to something greater. And then a derivative of that is saying no to the things that keep you from that, right? So I like to give the analogy of a marriage, right? So let's say you've got a bachelor, but he's now engaged and he's about to get married. And then he's thinking, I kind of think this is interesting. It would be cool to be in a relationship, but there's a lot of downsides too. There's a lot of things I'm going to have to say no to. I'm going to have to say no to every other woman. I'm going to have to say no to all my time. I'm going to have to say no to being relaxed every day. I'm going to have to say no to spending all my money on myself. I'm going to have to say no whenever there's a cute girl I want to flirt with at the office. I'm going to have to say no to all these sorts of things, right? But okay, well, if you think that, then you'll never get married. If you think of it and all the no's, right? Really, fundamentally, it's about saying yes to that woman. And it's about saying yes to her and giving your whole self to her in such a real way that you're going to say no to the things that keep you from her. So which one there's the more important and is the most fundamental? Clearly the saying yes, just as it is with a spouse. So it is with God. And then a lot of the times too in the Bible, you'll see God describe his relationship with his people in spousal imagery, right? A lover and a beloved, actually. And that's the relationship between Christ and the church, right? There's bride and groom. I'm not going to avoid sexual sin, or I'm not going to avoid greed, or I'm not going to avoid cheating on an exam because I'm scared of punishment, right? I'm not going to view Christianity and then the fight for holiness through that lens. I'm going to view it through the lens of God desires a relationship with me and has paid the ultimate price for me and is working every single day to reconcile me to himself and to invite me into an everlasting friendship of love. That's the object of my focus, not the sin. Christianity is fundamentally about saying yes and not about saying no. I think that if more people understood that, then I think we'd be in a lot better places as a church, and then individual souls would be in a lot better places too.
That's fair. That's fair. As you're going through like the beginning of this spiritual journey, you're researching questions that you're getting hit left and right at 5 a.m. on the freshman dorm floor. What was surprising? Like as you're researching, like, what did anything stand out of like, whoa, wasn't expecting that one?
I'll also answer a question that you didn't ask. Like what? No, thank you. Like what stood out among the people asking the questions? And what really stood out to me was the fact that most of these people, and there's a pretty representative group there, so I would like to generalize this the rest of the population too, but that while they won't usually initiate conversations of religion, right? It's a topic that they want to avoid in most cases. But once you start with them, they'll be interested and they'll want to talk. And that's really, really cool, because there were guys who I talked with for months. religion never would have came up yet. And then, so I would think, oh, it's not a big part of this person's life, or this person has never thought about it, or really fundamentally that they don't care about. But then I'll sit and I'll talk with them for hours. So they have this sort of innate capacity in them and this innate interest in the things of the supernatural realm of reality, right? The things of God. They have this desire and this interest, even if it's sort of lurking below the surface. Maybe that suggests that a lot of people are kind of stuffing this in because they don't want to think about it. That's why I really, really applaud the non-believers who do think about this stuff, right? So a lot of times, just because you're not a theist doesn't mean it's because you haven't thought about these answers, right? There are people, I think that agnosticism is very, very reasonable. I think that one can reasonably be an agnostic. I would not call him irrational for that. You can absolutely have reasons, right, for not thinking this is obviously true, something like that, right? I was really, really surprised to see that people who would never initiate a conversation and would have never talked about it, at least in front of me, would then be really, really interested once the conversation gets going and then pepper you with questions. That was really cool because you wouldn't see that with most issues, right? If you start talking about some theory in physics, right? Not to say that doesn't have any merits or value or isn't important, but they'd be uninterested, right? But religion is something that's interesting to everybody, right? Once you get it going, because it's so relevant to their experience, right? There's no question that's more relevant to the human experience than does God exist? Because that controls all of the fundamental questions of life, right? Questions of origin, right? Where did I come from? Identity, who am I? Meaning, what's the purpose of all this? Morality, what's right and wrong? And then destiny, where am I going? You notice that all 5 of those questions are connected to the existence of God, whether or not God exists, right? Everybody should be interested in this. And then I think everybody is once you get them going, right? So that was kind of what shocked me most when talking to people. What shocked me the most with researching was that you can have really smart people on both sides, right? You watch some of these debates and then both of the guys are geniuses, right? Very clearly. Both of them have really superior intellects and have both come to opposite conclusions in a lot of ways. That was really fascinating to see that really smart people can be found on both sides. But what's also fascinating as well about research was that usually the people making the most extreme cases were the people who were the least educated. And the people who were the most educated would make somewhat nuanced claims. So when you see like an internet or Reddit atheist saying there's no evidence for God, or that Jesus is just a myth, that Jesus actually never existed, and then all these sorts of extreme claims, they tend to be very uneducated people because the scholars don't say that, right? Your average atheist philosopher who understands what he's talking about. So atheist philosophers of religion, especially. So philosophers of religion study the arguments for and against the existence of God and sort of weighing the merits of both. And you look at these people, like Graham Oppy is the #1 atheist philosopher in the world. He's from Australia. He's written important books criticizing theism, but even he writes repeatedly that theism is rational, that it's plausibly true. There's another agnostic philosopher named Joe Schmidt. He's going to be a student at Princeton. And he recently remarked that he's 50-50, that he thinks that the evidence for and against God counterbalance each other, right? There's another agnostic philosopher named Philip Goff. He's made statements implying that he thinks it's 50-50 too, that there's strong evidence on both sides, right? So you see, on one hand, you have your Reddit atheists saying that there's no evidence, there's nothing, religious people are just deluding themselves. And then the most educated people are saying, no, this is possibly true. There is a case to be made. I personally don't buy it, but there's a strong case to be made. You do see the same thing on the other side too, right? You talk to some people at church, they might be extremely arrogant and thinking that, oh, God's existence is just so obvious. Like, look around, look how beautiful the world is. But no, there could be other explanations too. Like maybe that's the most probable, but there are others too. Just kind of be more modest in the claims that you make. The more educated one is, I think that they'll realize that there is a real debate here. And not to say you can't be confident in your convictions. So I'm confident that God's existence is much more probable than his non-existence. Like I'm confident in that. But I'm not going to say that if you disagree that you're irrational. I think there is a case to be made against that as well. So that's also what surprised me. So a lot of surprises on this journey, right?
That's awesome. Yeah, just the nuance behind. Well, first of all, you're saying that I shouldn't get my theology from Reddit. Is that what we're getting at here?
That would be sound advice.
The Reddit atheist, I love that. But yeah, it's kind of you can take that mold and place it in anything that disagreements happen, whether it's politics. I like to talk about sports a lot. I just had an argument with a buddy today because there's a big trade that happened in the NBA where Dame Lillard has come into the Bucks, and we're debating the merits of that. And like, we're both dumb when we're taking a really, really like entrenched side, and like the nuance is important, and it's okay that you don't know something. And I really like that you're able to find that along the way. So that was surprising for you that there were scholars out there that maybe don't believe in God that are smart, right? Is that what the conclusion was?
Or I would say the conclusion was that it's twofold. One, that there's extremely smart people on both sides of the debate, and then two, that the most educated people will tend to be more nuanced, and the people who make the most extreme claims have tended to have less education.
Got it. That makes sense. So this idea of faith is always fascinating to me. Of like, I remember, so my dad was a pastor growing up, and if we got to a point where he wasn't able to answer a question, it was like, well, you have to have faith. Is that ever troubling for you at all, like going through this and like try, like, because like you said, you were talking earlier about how like there's this sense of unknown almost, but at the same time it's almost, I forget how you phrase it, you're a lot more well spoken than I am, but did that ever come up of like faith being the answer, like that is the end point versus like the answer? Does that make sense?
No, that's, man, you ask amazing questions. That's why you're the interviewer here. I would say we didn't as much. I didn't get that as much coming up as a Catholic in these last 2 years, because the Catholic Church is, I think, very, very unique among Christian denominations and among really all religious traditions. You see this a little bit with Islam for a significant portion of their history, which is very admirable. But especially with Catholicism, you see fantastic intellectual tradition, like all the way back to the beginning with the Church Fathers, people like Origen and Tertullian, and then moving to Augustine and Anselm and Thomas Aquinas and Duns Scotus, and then all the way up to now, right? And then there's many, many great thinkers in between as well. You just see a tradition that's preceded us for 2,000 years of just some of the smartest men who have ever walked the earth, believing this and then developing this doctrine, the framework that we're looking at faith from, right? So St. Anselm had a great quote where he said that ours, talking about Christianity, is a faith-seeking understanding. I believe it was Anselm who said that. So we want to understand this, right? We want to be rational about this, right? Ultimately, if God exists, then all truth is God's truth, right? Whether it's coming from Neil deGrasse Tyson or from a preacher on the street, right? If it's true, it's coming from God. Truth can't contradict itself. Revealed truth from God in the scriptures can't contradict truth that we discover in nature, right? In the universe and in the created realm, right? We see them as kind of two sides of the same coin of truth. Part of it we're going to be discovering, and then part of it is going to be revealed, right? So there's the pool of data, and there's the divinely revealed data, and then there's the data that we discover through science and then philosophy and then other forms of acquiring information. I would say I didn't get that as much from a Catholic sphere, just because we want to be able to explain most things. Some things we're going to say are mysterious, like I'm sure the Trinity, right? The idea that God is three persons in one being is something that's so unique, right, to Christianity, because it seems counterintuitive at first glance. Like, why not just say three beings, right? Or just one person, one being. Like that's a lot more simpler, and that's what everybody else has said. Like almost everybody has said multiple beings, and then some people said one being, right? Especially Jews, Christians, and Muslims, right? But then the Christian is saying, yes, one being, but in three persons. That's extremely, extremely mysterious. Not absurd, right? But it's mysterious, right? People have come up with some sort of explanations for it. Like you could say that, well, you can reason to God's essence being love itself, right? So God is love itself. And whenever you have a genuine instance of love, then three things are required. There needs to be a lover, and then there's the shared relationship between the two. And so we could think of the Father being a lover, the Son being the beloved, and then their relationship of love would be the Holy Spirit kind of proceeding from those two. Right. So that's one explanation you could think of. That's certainly not dogmatic. That's something that's very kind of technical and then up in the air and then should be debated. But so you can kind of reason to some of these things. But yeah, there is absolutely mystery, right? And then even when we think about the word faith, right? Like people nowadays use the word faith as sort of like a leap when there's no evidence. So there's not reasons for this. I need to take a leap of faith, right? But when you look at how faith is used biblically, it's used more like trust, right? So it's trusting, and then that trust can be based on evidence or not based on evidence, right? I would say that for us, it's gonna be both. I think that there are reasons why you should think that God exists, and then there are reasons to think that He has decisively revealed Himself in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. That this is God's revelation and gift to humanity, but it's far from clear. It's far from obvious. It's not settled, and then so there is an element of ambiguity and then mystery. And then that's also the point of faith, is trusting what you can't see right in front of you. And then even Jesus says in the Gospel of John, blessed are those who have believed even when they have not seen. right? So there is absolutely an aspect of trust in that way.
That's awesome. I've never heard that growing up in the church, no one's described the Trinity that way. That makes sense to me. The love
Okay.
comparison. So that's well stated. What has been, so we're gonna kind of switch gears here. What was, if any, the reaction from family that you were like, for all intents and purposes, jumping in?
No, I think there's an element of not understanding as much, right? Just because when you're on the outside, right, and then right on the outside, and I was on
Sure.
the outside for most of my life. A lot of it can seem kind of crazy, right? Because it's foreign to you, right? But that doesn't necessarily discredit it, because if you're on the outside of the scientific community, right, and then you see a lot of the stuff that's said in fundamental, well, in the theoretical physics, right, about how they kind of describe what fundamental material reality looks like. It can seem really, really wacky at first glance, but then when you're in it and you've been learning it and you know all the language, and then you see the reasons why they're saying this, and then it seems a lot more reasonable. So I think when you're on the outside and when you just haven't really engaged with something, then it is going to seem kind of weird, right? I'd say that my family, they're not upset, right, that I've gone on this path, that I'm doing my best to seek God and to respond to God's love for me. But I think they're kind of at the stage where like, it's fine for him, but it's not really something for us. Like I can put words in their mouth. So not angry, but not really fully understanding, but being fully supportive, right? Like I'm allowed to go to church when I go back home. I'm allowed to go to the chapel to pray. I'd say supportive, just not fully understanding, right? Which is fine. So to continue to pray for that and for them, and to lead a life of love and joy, so they can see what an authentic Christian looks like.
That's awesome. That's an okay place to be, I guess, for them, right? Is like to not really fully understand it, but you do you, for lack of a better words, and we'll do us, and maybe they'll come around to you, or you just, that's how it is for the time being. But that's great. I'm glad that they're supportive of that. I think that's important. So we talked a little bit about in the beginning the Interfaith Fellowship program that you're involved in at UW. And essentially what that is, I don't know if I'd really describe that, as that we have people from different faiths that are coming together. I think there's like a 3-prong approach of like, what do people believe, understanding what other people believe, and then experiencing what other people believe. What are you looking to get out of it, or what's exciting about this journey for you of like talking with your peers that don't believe exactly what you believe?
Yeah, and then I've kind of noticing so far in the fellowship, there's maybe going to be like some sort of rifts between me and then some of the others, right? When you've kind of studied this like in depth, right, in certain areas, I'd say there's 2 main things that I'd like to contribute to the group, and then there's some things I'd like to get out of it too. With respect to the contributions, I want to shatter stereotypes of Christians. Right. What are 2 stereotypes of Christians, right? Kind of broadly speaking, especially among young people. Well, 1, that they're bigoted, and then 2, that they're unintelligent, right? So like on the bigoted side, like you'll see signs. We unfortunately just saw this a week ago in Madison, right? Guys with signs saying like all these different types of groups are just automatically going to hell. It's funny too, because they had Catholics on there. They had like good people,
Well,
sports fanatics, right? People of like all these other religions, like they're all going to hell. And there's the signs. They weren't here this past week, but everybody's seen the signs that says like God hates gays and stuff like that. People using their religion as sort of like a blunt object to hit people with is the impression that a lot of people get. And then on the other side, you've got people, again, it's a lot of times the fundamentalists, right? But you see people denying the fruits of modern science, whether that's from biology, insisting on a special creation, or insisting that the world is 6,000 years old or something like that. So both of these have fostered an environment. The gospel is seen as a sort of logical absurdity that no thinking man or woman could possibly believe this. I want to go into the fellowship and to the people that we interact with as a fellowship, and then show them what an intelligent and then hopefully loving Christian looks like, right? Because I think that we're not like that. Like we're all sinful. I sin, absolutely. I'm not perfect. I was just in confession the other day, but I'm not as villainous as those people, right? Like my goals are not nefarious. Like I'm going to fall short of my goals, but I do think that they are holy, and then through the grace of God, I think admirable in a lot of cases, right? Even though I fall short every single day. So I want to kind of show them what authentic Christianity can look like when somebody's actually trying, not when somebody's perfect, because by no means perfect, and I won't ever be, but I think that most days then I do try to be holy. So I want to show them what that looks like. And then I do want to contribute to a functioning democracy, right? Because we want to approach the world as we would like it to be, but how it is, right? And then most people don't believe what I believe. I would like everybody to come to a relationship with Christ. That's my goal. And then that's God's goal as well. God says that he is not willing that any should perish, but that all might reach repentance and faith. So God's will is universal salvation. Now that's ultimately not achieved out of human free will, but God is desperately pursuing every individual soul, desperately, and then has poured out himself on a cross when he took on human flesh for their sake, right? So that they can be reconciled with God. For each person, as if they were the only person to ever exist. So that's something that's so beautiful and that's worth fighting for. But not everybody believes that, right? So we still need to get along in society, and we still need to make progress in other ways too, right? Whether that's scientifically or politically or sociologically. I want to contribute broadly to more social cohesion in that aspect too. So that's what I want to contribute to the group, right? And then in terms of getting out of it, I'd like to learn about these other traditions, right? Because there's thousands of religions, not all the major, of course, but you can't learn all of them. But when you do have an opportunity to learn, it can reaffirm you in your own beliefs or open you up to somebody else's. Either one of those things is good, right? If you think that, if you're even more convinced that what you have is the truth, then you'll appreciate it more. But if you see that, okay, something else may be true too, something else may be good and beautiful, then you'll be open to that. So I think there's no harm that can be done from learning, right? The pursuit of knowledge is one of the most virtuous things that a man can do. There's only good that can come from that, I think, right?
That's awesome.
If it's genuine knowledge and pursuit, I think that only good can come from.
That's awesome. I think that's shattering the stereotypes. That's an interesting phrase. You go on TikTok or Instagram Reels or whatever, and like you just see ignorance a lot of times. And obviously, I think you mentioned it before of like political video is going to get more clicks than a religious one, but the religious ones, a lot of times it's talking about people that are idiots that are just talking like dumb stuff. So I think it's really cool when you meet people that are really entrenched in it, like yourself, and have this faith that still have that want and desire to not only learn about their own faith, but also learn about other faiths. Like you said, that how could that hurt anything? If anything, it's going to make your faith stronger, I would assume, right?
And make me appreciate it more too.
Exactly. What's like in the future for you? Like, so we were recently Catholic. We're in this interfellowship program. What do you want to continue on like with religious theology as like part of a career, or like what do you want to do with all of this stuff that you're learning?
I'd say I'm still kind of figuring that out. So my plan has been to go into business for a long time, and you can do good work anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the cool thing too is that even secular work, like working for Amazon, right, or working at a car company, right, even if it's not work that's sort of explicitly Christian based, right? Secular work, if done in Christ, doing it out of love, and if you're doing it for God's sake, then it can actually be just as valuable in the eyes of God as ministry that's undertaken explicitly for Him. There's always opportunities to do things out of love, right? Like anything. All types of work have dignity, right? And then work itself, because you're participating in imitating God's act of creation, because that involved work. You're participating in that, right? In that sort of creative grace. I would say that all types of work are holy. And then there's opportunities to evangelize in the workplace and to show people what the love of Christ looks like. I was able to talk about my faith in some of my internships, right, in previous summers. And then that's led to me getting lunch with employees to talk about faith. And that's led to other employees coming up and asking questions too, right? There's opportunities everywhere to love, serve, and know God, and to love your neighbor as you love yourself, right?
So this is a final question. And by the way, this is my wife's question. I can never take credit for this. She always tells me to ask this and I never do. And I just remembered it. What didn't we talk about, or what didn't I ask that you wanted to share that you wish that we had talked about?
It's a wonderful question.
She's a wonderful woman.
I would say just to consider the great questions of life, right? Because it's really easy with the society that we live in today to really kind of distract yourself with things that are a lot of times goods within themselves, but are not the highest good, right? There's great TV shows out there. There are really funny videos on TikTok. There are great destinations to travel to, right? But there's so much to do, right? In Western society, there's so many kind of things that can distract you from the deep questions that everybody should be engaged with, whether or not you're a theist. Imagine if you found out that the world was going to end in an hour, right? What would you do in that hour? You wouldn't sit and play video games. You would be really thinking about God's existence. And then I would say that our 80-year lifetimes, or 75 years, or whatever it is close to an hour, comparable to an hour on the time scale of infinity, right? So you should be living your life that way too, not out of fear, right? Again, not out of fear, but out of genuine curiosity and then mystery, right? Having this spirit that is adventurous and that wants to know the truth and that wants to know goodness, wants to know beauty, right? Those are called the transcendentals because they transcend all the different types of being, but also because they transcend cultures too. Like every culture has sought what's true. How do we describe reality? What's good and then what's beautiful, right? And then I think that we're at an interesting place right now where we're not really concerned about those questions. We're really kind of going down the path of hedonism, of like pleasure seeking, right? We're binge watching TV shows, or we're sitting on TikTok for 2 hours, or we're going to be watching 5 basketball games in a row on Saturday. Like why not just one? Like why does it got to be 5, right? And
well, there's 5 of them. I got to watch all of them.
Fair enough, right? No, but all this kind of stuff, right? You can really kind of, and then like movies and TV shows, like again, these are all good things. So, but they're not the object of our attention. So the question is like, what is the greatest thing that we can expect from our existence, right? Is it going to be something that's finite, or is it going to be something that's infinite? And we all acknowledge, right, that logically infinity is greater. We should really be contemplating that and really trying to get to the truth and then get to what's good and beautiful, right? And then I would add this like, really quickly, that philosophers of knowledge, right? They talk about something called, so they're called epistemologists, right? Philosophers of knowledge. And they make a distinction between justification for a belief and then pragmatic justification for a belief. And epistemic justification concerns the truth value of a belief. So is your belief true or false? And then pragmatic justification, on the other hand, concerns sort of the cost and benefits of holding a belief. So does your belief have more benefits than it does cost, right? And both need to be considered when you think about very important questions. I would say that we should really, really want Christianity to be true. I think that this is the most beautiful message ever, right? The idea that the God of all creation, the people who we get on our knees for, the people who we talk about serving all day and worshiping, literally the person that we worship is going to flip the script and then actually serve us and suffer for us. Like nobody else dares to say that God suffers for humanity. You see kind of small teachings of that in like some other religions, but a lot of times they're openly mythology, or they're just trying to be symbolic or like give some sort of message to or illustration to demonstrate that God would love us, right? But this is God actually tangibly suffering for us, God shedding blood for us. And it doesn't get more beautiful than that, right? I would say that we shouldn't want to demand absolute proof, right? We shouldn't want to something beyond a reasonable doubt, or to demand there be no questions left at the end of this. I'd say that the continuous pursuit of truth is virtuous and then is mysterious and then fulfilling. I would say to just kind of weigh both, right? Weigh the evidence as well as questions of the heart as well. And what you think the deepest desires of your heart are. And it's oftentimes not going to be the things of the world, but it is going to be loved infinitely and without any sort of bounds. So that's what I got.
No, I love that. Well stated. Dude, this conversation was awesome. You're a smart dude. And I learned a lot. I have a lot of things to look up and research for myself. I have a lot of things I need to look up in the dictionary because you use a lot of big words today, which is great. But I really appreciate you coming on and spending 1 hour or so just talking. And I wish you all the best in the school year. And hopefully you'll be on to bigger and better things after this next year.
Thank you very much. And I so appreciate what you're doing, kind of letting people experience and kind of expose them to all the facts on both sides, and to let them make a decision and to help them think about these things in a serious way. I wish you the best of luck on your own journey as well. Keep serving the community. I think that if God does exist, which I think he does, I think he'd be happy with what you're doing.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. Go Bucky, by the way. Let's not forget about Bucky.
All right. All right. Take care.
All right, James. See you, bud.
Thank you.